So, good afternoon. I'm Marie Hale, and you have come to Clutching Our Pearls podcast for a revolution. I am really passionate about the conversation that we are going to have today. We know that this pandemic, this culture became a reality because we had stopped talking about the things that were important to us and started talking business at some point. And in today's show, we're going to have some incredibly deep conversations about what it truly means to use the power of vulnerability and how that applies to leadership, parenting, and being real. Welcome to Clutching Our Pearls. I'm Marie Hale.
I'm Susie Shattuck, and we are your hosts.
I'm an entrepreneur, and I watched the women and the diverse persons around me lose their jobs and be told that they were disposable in numbers that were staggering and heartbreaking. This pandemic has torn us all apart in some way, and we're seeing it resurge again as I hear of family member after friend going back into the hospital with COVID. We have to build something bigger and more beautiful than what was here before. And the mission of Forward Revolution is to build a new way of doing things, an equitable way, and to give you the food that your soul needs to keep going. Note, you're going to hear adult words, just how we roll. Today, I am thrilled to introduce you to Robin Athey and to really dig into the power of vulnerability because it truly is a superpower. Robin guides leaders in the front lines of corporate, social, and environmental change through her company, Integral Growth. She helps them clear out the purpose, get back to that inner gold, and trust their innate wisdom, which you don't get to hear if you don't know how to be vulnerable. Her approach is gentle and powerful, and for those who wish and are willing to do the work, transformational. She brings 35 years of experience in working across 27 countries with Fortune 500s, startups, nonprofits, and NGOs. And today we get to say, OMG, we've got Robin Athey. Welcome to Clutching Our Pearls.
Welcome.
Thanks, Ree. Thanks, Susie.
So this topic is so near and dear to my heart because I was forced into being vulnerable publicly. I had lost my partner. I had to run a family business and grieve. And there was, no matter how big my glasses were, and trust me, I'll wear some big fancy glasses. There was no hiding the fact that I had moments of vulnerability. When you call vulnerability a superpower, Robin, what does that mean to you?
I so appreciate you even just using the term superpower, because for me, there's a paradox in vulnerability. It's a superpower, and the way there is not to power through. So I love the superpower, and I really want to emphasize that for me, vulnerability is a journey. It's not like something we can just turn on, and I even want to take away the heroic images, the Superman and all of that, because it's really the antithesis. Vulnerability for me is a path of integrating our trauma. It's a path of getting in touch with tender parts of ourselves. And another paradox is that for me to really come into our vulnerability is about becoming intimate friends with the really good reasons not to be vulnerable. And so, if I were to take away the kind of myths that we have around power and superpower and all of the, honestly, like very masculine myths and images around that, the cape man with a big S and all of that, and really touch into like, what is the power of actually gentleness, of touching into parts of ourselves that want a kind of grieving. And I love that you mentioned, as you were having to work through family business, the loss of your partner who was not just your business partner, but your life partner, and
Yeah.
being a single mom, how do you even grieve? How do you allow moments of gentleness when there's so much intensity? And the other thing I'll add is that for me, vulnerability is really coming into our not just the nature of our intensity, but even an addiction to intensity that we have in our world. And so for me, the way to really touch into vulnerability is not through intensity. We can't even feel it. My whole journey is about being totally numbed out as a leader, and I can share more, and really having to come to terms with the degree to which I was feeding intensity in my life, to the degree that I couldn't even feel my body.
Wow.
God, I relate.
Yeah.
I wish I didn't, but I do. I absolutely do.
Yeah.
I have a PTSD diagnosis,
Mm.
and a lot of what you're saying are like trauma behaviors. Like when you're talking about the addiction to the intensity,
Yeah.
that's like for PTSD, that's a trauma response. Is that a trauma response in a different way, or is that like?
Well, I mean, PTSD, any kind of trauma, is encountering something that's too big, too fast.
Mm-hmm.
Too big, too fast for our nervous systems to handle. And trauma is, PTSD refers to a kind of shock trauma, some big event, something that happens in our lives. It's too big, too fast for our bodies. And that can happen at any stage of life. So
Right.
that's often referred to as a big T trauma, shock. There's something called little T trauma too. And I work with both. I work even more with little T trauma with leaders, because that shows up everywhere in organizations. And that's this chronic, slow drip trauma of little things that feel too big. It may or may not be too fast. Shame is a big one.
Can you give examples of what you've encountered?
Yeah. So what I encounter, there are a couple of things. Let me share one assumption that I have.
Yeah.
A lot of trauma happens when we're kids, when anything feels too big, too fast for our bodies. And the vast majority of our core beliefs, and the vast majority of our wiring as human beings, is laid down before we're the age of 7. And most of that before the age of 3, as our brains and our nervous systems are developing. So you can imagine, for a 3-year-olds, by the way, who are complete sponges and looking at everything in their brains and their nervous systems, their biology is forming as they're watching and taking in the world. So anything can feel too big, too fast. It could be an accident. It could be mom and dad yelling, or people yelling. So all of this is building up. And then we develop these core beliefs. Am I safe in the world? Is it okay to have a voice? All of these things can add up. So a lot of that wiring has been laid down when we're very young. And often what I encounter in myself, and what I encounter in leaders when I work with them, is some belief, some disproportionate response to things that comes out as a reaction to things more than a creative response, where something feels bigger than it could or has to normally, feels bigger for you than it might for somebody else. So it's disproportionate. And that's a kind of key to something that may have happened. And I don't work regressively. We don't go into the past. Tell me about your mom. Tell me about your dad. We don't do that. But we do look at whatever's coming up in the present moment, because whatever's coming up in the present moment is something that's ready to be seen. So, and I can give you examples of this. It can be anger. Like all of a sudden I'm feeling an anger and I call someone out in a way that really hurts morale. It could be fear that comes up that I just can't even explain. It could be doubt. It could be a kind of, the leaders I work with are dealing with a lot of complexity and uncertainty. And that's the niche I work in. How do you work when you don't have easy answers, a lot of complexity, and this kind of deer in headlights comes, and not even be able to make decisions is a big one too.
Because those T's, big or little, like reduce your ability to handle the complexity. It gets you more into like a I want to say cave person mentality, where everything has to be real simple.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And we know examples of that. So Susie, when you had PTSD, I had an experience once where my home burned down. I could not make decisions for a week. People would come and they'd say, how can I help you? And I couldn't even take in the question for the first few days, like, what? And you literally can't make decisions. You can't even function. And I needed concrete simplicity. I have a bag of clothes. Would you like it? Oh, yes. I could respond to that.
Well, and that's something that they talk a lot about in the grief community is don't walk up to somebody who's just lost someone and say, what can I do? Because now you've given them something, you've given them a task, and their executive function is blown. Their limbic system is like, nope, I need all of the resources right here to keep this human moving. And so we're going to shut down things like emotions and decision-making and the ability to connect to other humans.
Totally. Comprehension.
It all goes
functioning.
Yeah.
Can't function through life. And that's happening every day because in a way, we're still walking around with kind of Paleolithic wiring. We haven't evolved a whole lot for the complexity of the world that we're dealing with. So you see a deadline and it might as well be a tiger in the bushes, from a nervous system perspective, and all day long we're bombarded by tigers.
Right. Yeah. And so, I think I love the idea of the big T's and the little T's, because one of the things that I often hear is that, Marie, I just listened to your story on XYZ, and I feel like my problems are so small compared to what you went through. And for me, there is no big or small. There is no the ultimate of grief and the, that was just a little sucky to lose that human. It's all it's all in the perception and the reaction of the person that is being impacted. So how are we able to respect one another's vulnerabilities and build that into the culture of either our families or our companies so that we can truly connect and maybe start to share those teas no matter what size they are?
Yeah. I so appreciate this conversation. I was leading a group of women at a very well-known tech company recently, and we were talking about authenticity. And this is for me a really tender one, because I'm all about essence. And if you go to my website, it's all about essence and authenticity and so on. And I realized I found myself feeling protective of these women because they were sharing in our group. We're in a program for 15 months going through some, really sharing very, very personal stuff. And getting deep. And I mean, deep stuff that is just not talked about. I've been, working in corporate environments for close to 40 years, and just not stuff that I still feel that corporate environments are ready for. I've been in conversations with men and senior leaders in corporate who said, we still don't understand why we need to show emotions. Doesn't fit. And so, how do you come out and take out your fine china, reveal your big stuff when people aren't ready for it? And so I've been listening. I went back to listen to Brene Brown, of course, as I was getting ready for this. And one of the things that I really appreciate, that she mentions is the importance of boundaries around what we can truly share, because there really is a fine line. And how do you even know what's appropriate to share when? And often it's a big guess. We do the best we can. There's some things that I like to guide people through. Number one, what's motivating you to want to be vulnerable? Is it to make it a point? Is it, because you feel angry? Is it because you feel like this is truly going to serve something for your team, for your organization? To get real about the nature of the motivation. The second thing is to really weigh the context. Who's going to be in the room? What could be the impact of this? And I actually ask people to map out if they're taking a first stab at vulnerability, or they feel like they want to share something that's tender for them, or somehow feeling exposed. I actually ask them to map it out, really map out the whole thing, maybe even do a visualization around it, but super clear about the in service of. What is this in service of? And then to do small experiments. I'll just come back to what I'm calling an addiction to intensity in the trauma work that I practice. Um, I'll just share a personal thing that used to be when I had to say something vulnerable. I did this little energetic thing where I'd like lob a bomb inside me energetically and then like back up, like, ooh, wait for the response. And that actually wasn't very effective because I think people picked up on that. Like, oh, she's lobbing a bomb. She's really scared.
Oh no.
So too big, too fast.
Mhm.
And so how do we just chunk things down in little ways so that our nervous system's not reacting to a tiger in the bushes or like too big, too fast, and how do we chunk things to titrate things in smaller ways that, give us a chance to kind of experiment, see what that's like. My approach to courage is little bits added up these days.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think, so many people will look at somebody else's story. And one of the things that's always hard for me to hear is, oh, you've been so strong. Well, I didn't have a choice to be strong or not. I
Yeah.
was thrown in the deep end and I was either going to survive or I wasn't. And I
Mhm.
appreciate you recognizing me and wanting to recognize me for where I've come to.
Mm.
But I truly found that in my moments of sheer terror, whether it was finding cancer in the middle of my face and having to sit there and let them cut over and over and over again, or dealing with the little things in life, like my new beau has an Italian family. Turns out the men in the family are not so keen on mental health, and we've got to get one of them into a psychiatrist somehow. So we've got a podcast coming on toxic masculinity and the stigmas around mental health. And so I've kind of fallen into the system of taking those vulnerabilities in the places where I feel helpless,
Mm.
or at least most helpless, and turning that around to say, I can't be the only person that's going through this. And it's okay for me. It does not make me less to
Mm.
share the pieces that are scary and the pieces that I don't feel qualified. My God, I'm still surprised they let me take my kid home every day. Mostly at the hospital, they just said, don't shake the baby. Cool. That was more, I was hoping for more of a parenting manual than that, but that's about all we got. So when you find yourself in moments of vulnerability that could be used to either connect with or lift up others in your life, how can we practice seeing that and feeling that
Yeah.
and bringing it forward and not just being somebody who bitches all over social media every day?
That is a really good point, because it can be so easy to put on this kind of mask or this armor and just deflect it all on everything else rather than have to feel the discomfort. So yes, that's huge. And context for me matters a lot. So you as Marie create a podcast where people can voluntarily opt in and they're actually really wanting to have this conversation. And I so appreciate that you're doing this because every bit that we can have these conversations, all the better.
Mhm.
And I'll share something I was texting with a friend this morning about that, of opting in as women and to talk about how we feel like we're going to be burnt at the stake if we really say what we want to say. But having a group dedicated to that, where it's a safe space, everybody is opting in. In a corporate or an organizational context, people aren't just like opting in to have these conversations. And a lot of people are very uncomfortable having these conversations. So different context. And where do you draw the line? Where are the boundaries?
Well, I think we've been taught to, starch our shirts and go to work and be logic and reason. And, like in the 80s when the women were wearing the big bows as ties and like kind of emulating masculine dress. I feel like in a lot of ways we've emulated masculinity as a way to assimilate into the business world. You know, that's um, I have a question for you. On your website, it says that you also do yoga and meditation. Is that a part of your business too? Like, do you bring that in?
To a point.
Yeah.
I've been practicing meditation for 25 years and yoga for most of that. I go in and out depending on my schedule. Yoga, meditation being an aspect of yoga in a larger sense. But I've had a dedicated practice for 25 years, and I do bring it in occasionally with clients. I'm very sensitive to context again. Is this someone who seems where it's even appropriate in their life? Often, you know, if I can have an exec like sit down for 2 or 3 minutes in the morning and just sit, you know, to have a little white space, do some kind of centering practice or something like that, that's awesome. You know, and if they could do 1 minute every day, better 1 minute every day than, you know, an hour on the weekend. So,
I think you possibly have a sensor like I do. Like, this is how woo-woo I can get with this. And this is where I need to hold the line. And some you can woo-woo with. And some
yeah,
you want to frame it completely differently.
yeah. I am to the extent that I can, I really do tune in. And it's surprising how many people are coming to me now and actually asking for a practice. Even my mom, you know, who, no way, has actually asked, like, how would I even do that? You know, and this is not somebody who would have touched anything like meditation. She has TVs on all around her 24/7 kind of person, you know, like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to stop and like notice my thoughts. No, thank you.
Well, and it's, you know, I think we've all been put through an experience where we were forced to understand grief.
Mm.
And when the pandemic first showed up, it didn't feel like grief because people were just starting to lose family members or were just starting to lose their choices and their lifestyles. And what I've seen is that those that refuse to step into the vulnerability of the moment lost connections with not only their pipeline, because if you are the kind of person that puts the mask on and everything is hunky-dory no matter what is happening, and Chicken Little is saying the world is, you know, falling down on top of our head, the sky is falling, and you go, oh, I love sky. You're going to lose those connections, and you're also going to start to lose the connections that are there with your family. So one of the pieces of advice that I got on another podcast was, you know, when you are feeling something very strongly with your family, it is not your job to put on a face of everything is okay,
Mm.
because the other people there not only can feel you, but they're probably scared too.
Yeah.
They're probably going through the same things you are.
Yeah.
And by refusing our own vulnerabilities and by adhering more to our masks than our relationships, we give up
Yeah.
so much.
Our masks, not our masks. Keep the masks on.
These masks on.
Yeah.
How as leaders of whatever experience we're in, whether it's just leaders of our own time and selves or leaders of our families or leaders of teams and organizations, how can we start encouraging others to embrace their vulnerability and to share those moments together?
Yeah. I am a very strong proponent of starting with self first and not orienting towards others. And a big reason is this, you know, there's so much packed in to vulnerability. And there's a lot of what Carl Jung called shadow. So I'll give a very personal example. I decided some years ago that I wanted to start being more honest and authentic with my mom. And packed in with that was a lot of anger and a lot of wanting to make her wrong. you know?
Yeah.
And so it's become really important to unpack that, you know? And I would say that this is a work in progress. You know, she's my biggest teacher on this front. You know, how do I actually allow a vulnerability that doesn't make her wrong? And so that's an important first step, I think, when it comes to family,
Yeah.
because family, you know, there's what's that saying? Like, you know, you think you're enlightened until you go home for
A prophet has no respect for his own.
holiday. Yeah.
If Jesus had teenagers, they wouldn't give a shit either.
Like these are our big teachers, if is my big teachers in life, you know, and my mom is big practice ground because boy, there's so many things, you know, so many choices that she's made politically and so on, and you know, so many things that, you know, I have felt some stuff around, you know, but I've really had to go in and look at my anger. Recently, I came through like 10 different sources of my anger, you know. It was like how I project on the projection onto somebody else of my own anger and, you know, my boundaries and my ancestral and blah, 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 like so many flavors. And so to really unpack that, you know, to really unpack like what really motivates the desire. And I find that same thing can happen in organizations because organizations, if you look really closely, I find this is true for me, and it was true for me as a leader for years, and I find it's true for a lot of my clients. When we look really closely at organizations, they're just like family constellations that are showing up again in our life. So many of the same patterns playing out. It's like bee to honey, you know, drawn right back in.
Mhm.
So, so getting really clear, you know, about what's motivating, number one, the desire for the vulnerability, and then really starting with self in safe ways, and then just watching impact on others. You know, how is that landing, and how is that landing, and allowing it to be clean.
So you just mentioned one of my favorite things, which is impact.
Mhm.
What, as we as leaders go through this journey of doing the self-work and seeing the impacts, what are some of the things that show up when we are seeing those impacts? Because nobody is ever going to run up to you and say, Robin, oh my gosh, thank you for being so vulnerable. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you do see that start to show up as key performance indicators in the beginning?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I encourage leaders to do, and often will walk through, how do you have difficult conversations? And vulnerability and sharing a vulnerability is a difficult conversation. I don't ask leaders to take out their fine china, you know, to in terms of vulnerability. I'm careful, and I find that women are a lot more ready to disclose than a lot of the men that I work with. Um, but we walk through a conversation that actually invites feedback along the way, you know. And a vulnerability, there are lots of ways of structuring conversations that can get more and more refined and more revealing. But a very basic one is when this happens, you know, I feel this. And then I make up a story about this. And I shift that language sometimes depending on the executive, but then I invite feedback in it. How is it when I share that? You know, before I even make a request, checking in, checking in, checking in. So I actually ask for that dialogue along the way, um, and make sure that it's not a monologue.
Yeah. And I think that, what Anas just said is if we do have people that are willing to come to us, that we know the difference between holding space and
Yeah,
telling them what to do with their lives.
yeah,
Because first of all, not everybody wants you to solve their problems.
yeah.
And second of all, the
Most
more
people
we can
don't.
take the information in, the more we can do larger things with it, as opposed to just being so singularly focused in the moment. And there are times when you've got to be singularly focused. And then there's times when you've got to sit back and be like, okay, if this is what I'm hearing,
Yeah,
then I need to make sure that I am responding appropriately. Because nobody wants a bared soul and no response.
Yeah.
Oh God, that's the worst.
That's the worst.
That's the quietest quiet.
You know, you said something about our capacity to take something in. And that for me means so much, because when things start feeling dangerous, you know, the armor goes up.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, it's really hard. I mean, ultimately, end of the day, you know, being vulnerable is a bid for connection. And so we've got to be able to sustain and to have these conversations in a way that allow connection. And so anything too fast, too big on, you know, either side can shut that down.
Yeah. I appreciate that, considering I have a highly dominant personality, and I can often run in and be like, we're going to have feelings
now.
Are we? That was not on my schedule.
So, Robin, if you could leave our audience with one piece of information today about how to either start on their journey of vulnerability or how to listen more and be more present, what would you say?
Yeah, the first thing is really checking in, like, in service of what? What would this serve? You know, and is it really a bid to air something that you really want to air, that really you would prefer to have as a monologue rather than a dialogue? That's important to know.
Yeah.
And so checking in there, and then really just checking, like, the context. Timing matters a lot. Conditions matter a lot. You know, remembering that for a lot of people, when we have these conversations, you're not with an adult, you're with the adult plus the little one that felt something too big, too fast. And so appreciating that, and appreciating our own capacity too, you know, because for me, the road to vulnerability is a journey. It's one that has many layers, and it's really about tapping into the really good reasons that we're not vulnerable first, and touching those before we even, like, get into, like, big conversations. What are the really good reasons that I wouldn't be vulnerable, and what are the really good reasons that this person might not be vulnerable? You know, and honoring that.
Yeah. And I think, you know, in Clutching Our Pearls and in the Revolution, we have such a culture of respect and of holding space and of being vulnerable. That it was even written into our employee manual that tears are going to happen. And this is to be expected, and it is okay. If it's uncomfortable for you, then please feel free to either step out or ask me to step out, or whatever happens, whatever needs to happen. But as we all move forward together, there is not one path that is going to come up, because we are all going to have paths that are impacted by what's happening outside, right? And nothing ever changes dramatically in the world quickly and without notice. There's what's happening within your structure, be it your family, yourself, or your company. And then there's the relationships that you've built and you continue to build. And if in those spaces you can take some of Robin's advice and check in on what your reason is for being vulnerable or wanting vulnerability from somebody else, and how you can use it to leave the situation better than you came in, without telling them what it is that they're supposed to do. You've got a great opportunity to really change and make some impacts. I highly encourage you to connect with Robin. You can connect with her on LinkedIn, go to her website, get on her newsletter. She's doing transformational work in the space of vulnerability. And you always know that you can find the revolution just about everywhere, because we are taking over the world. I do want to say a great big thank you, and send lots and lots of love to our guest today. you share so beautifully and so simply what is a very complex system of taking care of people. And I think my biggest takeaway from today and the piece that I'm really looking forward to processing is, why do you want to be vulnerable in this moment? What is it going to bring back for you? And what is your intention? Susie, what was one of your big ahas today?
I could keep talking for 3 hours to her because there's just so much and it's so complicated. But I don't know. I think about introducing vulnerability into the workplace in a way that is more measured. I think, like not putting my whole vulnerability body in the pool, but dipping a toe, then a couple toes, and like trying to get more. I don't know if incremental's the word, but yeah, understanding your motivations and then taking a little bit at a time. Otherwise, because I know a lot of people, like myself included, have had interactions where people have used vulnerability that was put out in really negative ways. Used what I shared as a weapon, and that's a very real thing that happens, and that people need to be concerned about and protect themselves from. And I think doing that in the incremental way will show you who sees vulnerability as a tool and who sees it as a weapon.
Great distinction.
So again,
it's from an Ani DeFranco lyric from the 90s. So
yeah, Ani DeFranco.
We have so many folks in the revolution that really do orient from a place of love and vulnerability and are growing in this space. And so we're going to be excited to hear all of the things that are coming out of your incredible organization. Susie, can you bring us home?
I can. So first, I want to thank you, Robin, for being here, for your time and your wisdom, for sharing that with us. This community is on a journey, and we want you to come along. If you haven't already, make sure to join our member portal. Our link is everywhere. It's probably in the comment section, where you can interact with other revolutionaries, level up your professional skills through our courses, and attend our badass events for free. This is where we live out our big purpose. We've got some fun events, since our whole theme this month is business power through vulnerability. Next week, 8 days, we have Jeanette Jerzik doing a creative communication workshop featuring improvisational skills. And it's going to be a great event where we can engage our creativity and workshop in person, over Zoom, naturally, and learn how to overcome your nerves, build confidence in any presentation or performance setting, team building, networking skills, breaking out of your comfort zone, and how to command an audience. So it's going to be participatory, and we can't wait for you to join us next week.
Yeah, we want you to be able to get up there and talk about yourselves in all of the big, beautiful ways that you are growing and changing. And that's not always easy, especially when mom had a different plan for your life. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Fifth Third Bank, Speech IRL, Safety Chicks, and Flux Wheelchairs for always being there for us and having faith in us. And for today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to say, get out there, find a reason to be vulnerable, and find a reason to be vigilant. This is Marie Hale and Susie Shattuck with Clutching Our Pearls, being graced by Robin Athey. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening.